So welcome everybody. I'm very excited to have you all here. This is the first of hopefully a series of events that Miro will be running in the coming months. I'm Eduardo. I work as a UX researcher at Miro, and with me, three great facilitators that will show us how we can embrace some of the facilitating skills that they put in practice day in and day out. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to be sharing the screen and give you permission now to introduce yourself in a few words. The idea of the day is that these three speakers, and you can join the board to follow what we'll be doing. So these three speakers will walk us through this type of maze and set of questions that we have put together. And we will have also a Q&A at the end. So it's not just me asking the questions, but you as a team will bring up any questions that you may want to bring. So without further ado, let me introduce you with the three speakers. Let's start with Anna. Anna is a service designer, and she puts together different set of co-creation processes and applies neuropsychology and game design to her work. She is the co-founder of a design agency called Service 8 in Europe and a partner to the co-creation school. So Anna, if you can tell us in a few words some of your typical projects and how you apply facilitation in your day-to-day.
Yeah, hi, greetings from Slovenia. Typical projects. Mostly I help organizations and teams design co-creative processes, which usually involve multiple stakeholders, and then help them facilitate the process using service design, design thinking, applied improvisation. In the past few years, I've been focusing mostly on projects in the public sector. I also create different types of courses. At the co-creation school, we teach people how to facilitate and how to use different insights from neuropsychology into their everyday life.
Wow. Thank you, Anna. Like we'll touch on some of those projects and particular skills a bit later. Now let's move to Justin. Justin joined us from Kansas City. He works at Crema as a lead facilitator, and he has a very particular way of addressing challenges. And I've seen him in action in some of his design sprints and the work that he puts together. Justin, could you tell us a bit some of the projects and your team setup when it comes to remote collaboration?
Yeah, you bet. Yes, my name is Justin, and if any one of my three children come into the room today, you can wave at them, they'll wave at you. So just a heads up, it gets noisy in here. So I work in an agency that works with all kinds of clients, from startups to enterprise, from different industries, from healthcare, managed services, technology, athletics, all kinds of different industries. And one thing is true, that every time we begin working with a new client, we always start off with some sort of workshop. We call those our product labs. They can be anywhere from 4 hours to anywhere to 2, 3, or 4 weeks. Sometimes they have prototyping and validation, like a design sprint. Other times it really focuses around alignment and prioritization. And so we kind of spread everything in between. But what we do is similar to what Anna mentioned, is that we co-create, we work together to equip the teams that we're working with to better understand themselves, the problem they're facing, and the opportunities in front of them by using workshops that get the best out of everybody, that level the playing field, and that help people work better than they normally do on their own.
Thank you, Justin. It will be super excited learning from you. And after hearing two of you working mostly with clients and in projects that keep changing, let's introduce Laura. She's a designer, researcher, and workshop facilitator. She works at a large company, PayPal, in the financial sector, and she facilitates product discovery. So Tell us, Anna, tell us, Laura, in a few words, some of the challenges and your team setup when it comes to collaboration. So we interpret some of your thoughts later on.
Yeah, the biggest challenge is, of course, right now that everyone inside of a large company is working remotely. This was even a challenge when we weren't working remotely, just kind of collaborating with people, because we're often working in distributed teams. And I find that that's one of the things that we'll be talking a bit more about on the panel, but it's certainly an interesting challenge for a large company. For me, the challenge is that I am working across many different roles, and oftentimes I am running a traditional design sprint, like this week I am, but it also happens a lot, like Justin said. I might also be helping people to align on what is it that we're actually trying to solve, what's the real problem, who's the customer. And so having different roles, anything from marketing to legal to design and product engineering, just bringing them all together and bringing them on the same page is probably the biggest challenge that we face.
Wonderful. I think many of us can resonate with that. Seeking alignment and getting people on the same page. I'll be very keen to learn deeper how you make that happen. But before we dive into the question, we had here this icebreaker, and I would like to explore with you what you as an audience have put together. So we're comparing meetings to workshop, and workshops is the green color, meetings the red color. So just by looking the spectrum, we see workshop being more structured than meetings, but meetings are also sometimes structured and with a proper agenda. The formality seems that meetings are a bit more formal and workshops tend to have an informal touch. We see a big variety of small and large here, and we see meetings as a more passive thing and workshop as an active thing. Great insight here. And then about the preparation, workshops are well prepared, and we see meetings, some of them, they really lack some of the shape and form and goals of the meeting. And last, workshops are more to do with ideation and meetings more with conversation. Great seeing there is some polarity in some of the criteria, and there is some diversity in others. So now let's move, following this maze, starting the round table, and I will also introduce two of my colleagues. They are product designers, and they're going to be spicing up a bit some of these slides with some of the words that our experts will share. So first question is for you, Anna. Tell us a bit, what have you learned throughout your Miro journey? I'm very curious to hear some anecdotes or things that you could share with us.
Yeah, thanks. So I think the first thing I learned using Miro was that assumption is the mother of all. Because I have a design background, and using Miro, which I started using at the start of the pandemic, was sort of intuitive to me. I've used other design programs, and it felt sort of natural that other people will understand it as well. And this assumption, especially at the beginning, was very crucial, because a lot of people didn't have the confidence or the familiarity with online work, with computer programs. So that was the first thing. The second thing I really learned was the power of visualization. We already know this coming from a design thinking background, but because with these tools, it's so easy to add an image, to add a smiley, to add a square, that people really flourish when they can visualize what they're thinking, and how the communication really improves. I'm going to talk a bit about this a little bit later, but I use now Miro every time I have a meeting, and I would just visualize whatever we're talking about, because it's just so much more efficient, because we all know that we're on the same page. And then the third thing I really learned throughout the journey was the preparation and the importance of preparation. Probably Laura and Justin also maybe would agree that it takes much more preparation in an online setting than you would face to face. You have to prepare the boards, you have to give instructions, you have to think about how are people gonna interact. There are technical issues. And in a way, it has helped me grow as a facilitator because I had to think much more thoroughly before the session. What am I gonna do? What do I want as an output? Who's in the room, and making sure that everybody feels comfortable.
Thank you. Thank you. And yes, as a matter of fact, I launched a poll to see how are we all feeling in the sense of how experienced we feel as an audience today in preparing workshops. And we see here about 20% not at all confident, so mostly new facilitators or no facilitators yet, and some 37% a little confident. And when it comes to facilitating, we see a higher confidence. Probably, I guess this is gonna come because of the offline experience. So keep this in mind. I'm going to end this poll. So keep this in mind when you frame some of your answers. Let's move forward. And
hey, Eduardo, I want to interject real quick. I'm seeing a lot of people chatting, asking if we can see the chat. Yes, we can see the chat. We realize that the board is not hosting all the participants. We have 745 participants and about 300 people on the board, anywhere between 160 and 300. And just to speak real quickly, transparently, as a facilitator who does not work for Miro, most of the workshops I do range from 10 to 30 people. Sometimes we go 50 to 100, but never do we have like 700 participants at once. So if you're having trouble getting into the board, I encourage you to simply watch the Zoom recording, and Eduardo will make sure to zoom in so we can read each of those sticky notes. But don't think that you have to be on the board to process what we're talking about and ask questions in the Q&A and functions like that.
Definitely, we have the chat. We have also Q&A that you can enter your questions, and also a vote. And we will have towards the end a good amount of time to go through the most voted questions. So it's not just the 7 questions we have prepared here, but we'll really cover and help you. The end goal is help you up-level your facilitation skills. So anytime for Justin, Laura, and anytime that I'll change to the next question, if you want to interject and say something. This one has been a great help as a co-facilitator in this session. Feel free always to interrupt and interject with some more insight. So moving towards the second question, and this one is for Anna as well. We have seen that there is a difference between meetings and workshops. I'd like to hear a bit some of your thoughts into what type of meetings you facilitate using Miro, and why are those in Miro?
Yeah, so I've facilitated strategy workshops, team buildings, even a Christmas event. There were a lot of conferences as well. For those that are in the Miro, you can look at them. If not, we'll share the images afterwards. Also recently, I've started using Miro for my own projects. So for personal, let's say I'm doing a presentation or I'm writing a paper or something, I would just use it to visually collect all the information that I need and then structure it in a really easy way. It's actually, yeah, it's like having a wall and a bunch of post-its, and it's even more than that because you can put videos, you can put PDFs. So it's really, I really like how creative you can get with it, because it really allows a lot of stuff to do.
Wonderful. So sessions sometimes individually where you are not necessarily mingling with a lot of content, and also some type of team building events. And why do you use Miro, for example, for those type of meetings?
The team building, or?
Yeah, let's say team building. I think it's interesting to hear how you use it.
Well, it's interesting. One of my favorite functions in Miro is when you can link individual elements. So, and there's like a small arrow when you link, so you can create a journey for people, right? And people can decide where they want to go. if you create it in that way. And it really offers people to explore. And you can really play with that. You can make games with it, like board games. And I really like this interactive part of it. And you can embed videos, and you have the zoom in and zoom out, and you can hide stuff. Like, for instance, at the beginning of the workshops, we would often have what we call a sandbox. So it's like a Miro, a separate Miro board that people can visit before the actual session, where they can learn about Miro, or they can create their profile card. And we would hide the Easter egg there. So we would hit it somewhere around the board, and then people would have to find it, and then we would talk about it. So it really offers so many ways how you can engage people to participate.
Super, that interactivity, participation to make meetings that are often less, like more passive, less active, more engaging. Great. I'm seeing some comments on the chat, and Star just really pointed out, I'm going to show you, if you are annoyed by seeing the cursors, like so many cursors, you can click on this button, hide collaborator cursors, so they are not disturbing your view. So it's really an option. Some people really enjoy see where others are. Sometimes when there are too many, it's really hard. Okay, so let's move a bit away from meetings and hear about workshops. And I'd like to hear from Laura. What type of workshops do you use Miro for?
I'm using it for every single kind of workshop, it seems, since I collaborate with people across PayPal. I was mentioning I work with people from different roles. So I might show up to facilitate a conversation, like, for example, with an interest group. We have a women's leadership interest group called Unity at PayPal. And so I'll use Miro to kind of facilitate a conversation where people are collaborating and contributing their own ideas and kind of thinking through their own personal career development that way. I might also use it for like a large presentation, not unlike what we're using right now. My colleague Wyatt Starosta and I presented last year at SF Design Week, and we used Miro to do that because we really felt like it was a great way to engage our audience. I don't think we had as many people online as you have right here, which is amazing. But we found it a good way to get people to jump in and start bringing their ideas to the forefront and kind of collecting those as one. And then, I'm just using it for very like traditional design sprint work as well. I'm running one this week. I've learned a lot about the kinds of things that do and do not work in Miro. And I can go into those a little bit more, but you'll see in some of the examples further on in the board, I've really kind of worked through some ways like, okay, how can we get people to sketch? Like, sketching is such a difficult task for a lot of people. And so using things like the icon finder or the image finder. And then I've also started building my own templates that allow people to craft their own storyboards. Is another like technique. I'm trying to make it easier for people to engage in ways that are creative than they have in the past. So those are just a few of the things I'm using it for right now.
You told me before this call, hey, I'm gonna jump directly to the webinar from a workshop. Could you tell us something about that workshop that you were part of?
Yeah, sure. I'm facilitating a group in Stockholm, New York, Chicago, and the Bay Area. I'm located in San Jose, California. We are integrating a company that PayPal acquired a couple years ago, and we are planning a launch of that product. It's Zettel, based out of Stockholm. We're planning a launch of that. So we're really thinking through how to bring the PayPal brand strategy together with the Zettel product offering. And I will tell you, it's as much of a conversation about two very different groups of people trying to understand who we're delivering for, as much as it is actually a creative experience of figuring out what we want to say and how we want to explain that value. So some of it's the nuance of like, okay, what do you mean when you say that? But a lot of it is also like, what's the information architecture? What's what's the wireframe? How are we going to actually get through each one of these steps for our customers? So we do a lot of journey mapping and that kind of a workshop. We do a lot of flow diagramming. We do a lot of sticky note, value prop creation, just the kind of things you would expect a large company to do when you're working on something really sophisticated in terms of what you're trying to explain, and you're really trying to give it to your customer in a way that makes sense to them.
It's really magical that you name like so distant geographies working together on the same page, like writing on sticky notes that are gonna sit next to each other. So really, really inspiring that you make this use and no travel these days, I'm afraid. Wonderful. Let's cover how Justin uses Miro for what type of workshops, and give us any examples, anything that you believe could enrich this audience.
Totally. Like I mentioned at the beginning, we kick off every engagement with a client in Miro with some sort of workshop. And then we also do that in the middle of engagements and afterwards. So some examples are, we use them for pre-mortems, for retrospectives, for design sprints. So Eduardo, if you zoom in on that first one to the right of can you share in the example, this is a full design sprint board, and you can find our template in the Miroverse Krima's design sprint board. On the left, we have the welcome that we took people through to get them to learn how to use it. On the first day, that first column underneath Krima client design sprint, if you're able to stop clicking and dragging out, that's wonderful for any, if you're a participant here, try not to click on stuff while we're looking at things. So on that first day, we've got.
So you said you have this welcome for, is this for new users or for any?
That is for the full team. We sent that out to the entire client team to say, please fill out this this exercise beforehand. And there's a Loom video up at the top left that says, here's how you do this, etc. And I'm going to get to how I feel about the fact that we did that later, because I would definitely change what I did here. So don't write this down as the best solution. And then we had a context week. That's column 1. Column 2 is day 1. Column 3 is day 2. We had all the user testing documented in there, sketches documented there, the agendas in there. So like a full week design sprint. That's we use it for that. But if you keep going to the right, Eduardo, you're going to see several things. You're going to see ways that we've mapped out organizational charts. We've got together with teams to say, okay, it seems that right now you guys are looking at your organization this way. We suggest you look at it this way with these partnerships and this way over time, grouping things in this way. Beneath that, the one that has those larger black sticky notes, that's a workshop that I went with a community that I'm leading here in Kansas City for design sprints and facilitators. And that was simply, hey, submit ideas. We're going to group those together. So really simple, provide ideas, and we're going to cluster those together in affinity maps, or we're going to heat map it. That's another word for that. Oh, okay.
So we follow some of the examples you're mentioning. I'm following you.
Perfect.
If you now move your mouse, we will all see your screen.
Yep. Okay, so then what we've got is up here, we have another simple, this is like a 3-hour workshop, people listing out their purpose. What are we doing here? We evaluated some things, we prioritized them, and then we mapped them together. So pretty simple, walk in with a purpose, walk out with the top 3 next steps. Here is more of a strategy and alignment type of thing where we're not walking away with validation or prototype, but we're aligning the team. So we did some icebreakers. We had an opportunity where people asked questions here. We moved into an elevator pitch to define the product that people were working on. We talked about what business goals are for specific people on the team. We mapped out user profiles using Miro's grid functionality, which is really great because you can click and drag and you can say, okay, it seems that all these people should go to the front of the line and this feature should go to the top. We filled out a value proposition canvas. Again, all this is redacted, a lean model canvas. So those are all different ways that we've done workshops. And then here is like a 3-hour hyper specific, like with hyperlinks. You click a button, it goes to the next frame, click a button, it goes to the next frame, breaks up into breakout rooms, goes back to the middle. So those are all just different examples of types of workshops that we've done and what we've used Miro for.
Yeah, you name a few things. Like last one was navigation, so people don't get lost. You have some hyperlinks, and then you mentioned at the beginning you have your design sprint template. I think it will be really valuable to share it in one of the resources at the end of the workshop, because you can actually get out of this meeting and this webinar and try to apply it with some of your templates to save a lot of time. Great. So I
Can
love.
I ask something, Justin?
Please do.
Yeah, so I saw that you have black boards, or you have like black backgrounds.
Yes.
Any particular reason why you choose those?
Because dark mode is trendy. I'm just kidding. So the reason that we do that is because people are looking at a screen for like 5 hours a day, 7 hours a day. And when we're asking them to be fully engaged, I find that to look at a Miro board with the natural like off-white, I think it's F2, F2, F2 is the hex number, if I remember correctly. I'm a little bit of a nerd on that one. To look at that color all day long is really overwhelming on the eyes. And so I like that when I bring a client into Miro, that we're providing hospitality, just like we would in person, to make the physical space seem as welcoming and as simple for them to engage fully. I want the digital space to be like that as well, to be as easy on the eyes as possible.
I think one thing that thank you for explaining. That's really great, because oftentimes the difference in my world is that I'm trying to capture the attention of full-time employees. And so it would be rare for me to get 7 hours of their time. I usually work in chunks of like 2 to 3 hours, maybe. And if I get 3.5, I'm like, okay, we're going to really crunch out some stuff here. But I tend to keep mine pretty, just out of the nature of working in a large company. People can't, and different time zones, I suppose, they're not going to be able to commit more than 3 hours at a time. But I really appreciate that you've really thought through the experience from the client's point of view.
And before we move forward, a follow-up question, like you talk about we're many hours in front of the computer. How do you deal with people who have this fatigue? And some people say Zoom fatigue, but in general, like we are in calls after calls, like one day after another. How, what strategies have you explored, and do they work? Tell us, any of you, any of the three.
I'm just going to give a short answer to say that I'm going to touch on this when we talk about tips and tricks in Miro. So remind me to answer that question then. But Laura, you were going to say something.
I mean, I insist on taking breaks. I think that's something that people in the live office space were kind of like, oh, we can power through it. I'll just take a break when I need it. But I think in this realm, I'm very, very decisive. It is time for a break right here. You're going to have and then also keeping in mind that sometimes you need not just a 15-minute break, you may need a half an hour break, because people may want to sit down and have dinner with their families, or they may be taking, helping their kids kind of get ready for their own school. So I'm just much more insistent about taking those breaks.
Taking breaks, is this full responsibility of the facilitator, or how do you set up the rules? What if one of your participants needs that kind of 10 or 15 minutes break? How do you cope with that?
I mean, I expect that to happen, because again, people might get slacked by, the executive VP or something. So I always have somebody, I try to always nominate someone to kind of be what I call the attendance taker. I don't need to know the attendance, honestly, but I need somebody that people can go and tell, I'm not going to be here for a moment. And the reason is because we don't want to, call on them and not be there. That can be kind of humiliating for anyone. So I just kind of say, so that there's somebody as a backup can say, hey, they had to go take a call, or they'll be right back, or something like that. So I do usually nominate someone to kind of be the attendance taker, if you will, just to kind of keep track of who's in the room and who isn't virtually. And I'm, again, working for a large company, I'm not going to be so insistent that there's something bad's going to happen to somebody, because that things come up in life, and I think we're all becoming more empathetic towards that when we work from home.
Okay, and one last follow-up, what is the right number of breaks? Every how long do you think a break is needed?
I would say ideally after every 45 minutes.
So,
Ideally, but often that doesn't happen, at least in my experience. But we also include activities that force people to get away from the computer. So we would say bring something from somewhere else, and they're forced to stand up and move around. But yeah, ideally every 45 minutes.
that's a great trick. Okay, let's move forward. During some of my research sessions, and I tend to meet both facilitators and participants, I've learned that sometimes facilitating your first workshop is intimidating. What challenges or common mistake have you observed in those who are a bit less experienced in facilitating? Laura, can you take this one?
Yeah, and first of all, I want to make sure everybody knows there's no kind of mistake that you can't or experience you can't recover from either during the workshop or after, you know, like by following up. I have made so many missteps. I think I made one this morning, probably. So, you know, this is very common for anyone to have as a facilitator. It did happen this week during the sprint. After the second day, a couple people reached out to me afterwards and said, I'm really worried. I don't think this is going the right way. I don't think that actually we're doing the right thing. And so just know that actually, sometimes it's just going to happen. Actually, it would be strange if people were just like, oh yeah, that's great. They might not be engaged enough. It shows that they care. I think one of the things that I used to do more frequently is I used to ruminate on that and worry that it meant something that it doesn't really mean. I thought it meant that I wasn't good at facilitation. And now I just know, like, oh, that's just something that happens. You know, we have to reset. Not everybody's going to be on the same page. That's why we're all talking. It's a good thing. And remind my participants, like, hey, I want you to provide feedback. I need you to provide feedback, especially in this zone where I can't get a feeling for how you're engaging. So something that I used to do as a facilitator is because I was uncertain, I would kind of leave it up to the group what to do next and not really be clear about we're going to do this next. And I think as you get a little bit more experience, even if you're not right in knowing like that you need to pivot on something, telling the team like, hey, I see here, even though we had this in the agenda, it's time to pivot to this kind of an exercise. Be clear about the exercise you want them to do instead of what I would sometimes do would say, almost like a choose your own adventure. Do you guys want to dot vote? Or do you want to just have a break and have the VP decide? You know, don't do that. Just go with your gut and really like go in on what you believe you're going to need the team to do, and then come back later if that wasn't the right thing and address it.
Okay, so like you mentioned a few things that might be mind-blowing for some. So you said about follow your intuition, even if that goes against the original agenda. Even give out some control to the group. So instead of keeping the control as a facilitator, you kind of leave it up to the group to decide. What else? What else have you noticed that might be common things to watch out for?
I want to go off of what Laura just said. I think there's all kinds of fatigue that we need to be thinking about as facilitators. Zoom fatigue is one of them, but Laura, I love that you mentioned decision fatigue. Like, we've brought people together to solve a specific problem. For us to then introduce our problems and for them to solve it, like, totally goes against the point of us as facilitators bringing people there. And so I just want to ditto that it's our job to make the decisions. In fact, Jay Malone, in a meeting a couple of weeks ago, he runs a studio called New Haircut. He said, I think that facilitators forget just how much people like being told what to do in workshops. And I think that's something that someone who's new to facilitation, they lack maybe that confidence, or they're not good at faking that confidence to just say, I've got a plan, I'm going to go with it until there's a point where my gut's telling me otherwise, I'm going to go with that. So I think those two things, you got to hold those in tandem.
I used to employ a technique when I first started facilitating, is without I wouldn't announce this to the group, but I would actually I would choose one person and I would tell them, I would say, you're my chief decision officer. I would say, when I run into a question that I'm having, I'm gonna take a break. I'm gonna take you to the side. I'm gonna talk it through with you, and you're gonna help me make the right decision about what to do next. And so there was always somebody kind of in the audience or in the participation or in the room who was my CDO, my chief decision officer, to kind of help me through that situation.
Wow.
Yeah, and just to build on, can I just build on that? What we've learned now, but this is a privilege. I'm not sure that you can do that in a big, larger corporation. We usually facilitate in teams. So there's always two of us. And like you just mentioned, you have somebody that you can talk to and you can sort of ping pong ideas. This really, really brings the quality up of the session, because you can divide tasks. You can talk about like what you're seeing, how you want to adapt. You can also get different styles from facilitation, which is also nice for the people. So yeah, totally. Having somebody to help you was really cool.
I want to add one last thing. Oh, Eduardo, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, how cool. I'm seeing the evolution of the board. So our audience is adding things here. Our doodlers are kind of spicing up with drawings. I'm enjoying the experience. Go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, so as a dad, I've got a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 9-month-old. And with each child, my assumption about how soon I can get to a location, the buffer has increased to the point where it's like, if I'm traveling somewhere with all 3 kids, my wife and I are traveling with all 3 kids, I need to like add in 30 minutes for just family things. And I think similarly, someone who's not experienced in facilitation will assume that they can accomplish more than they really can in a certain amount of time, especially in the digital workplace. And I think if you're using Miro, you should, whatever you think it'll take, if you're like, this will probably take 20 minutes, I kid you not, budget 40 minutes for it. I would always rather have more bandwidth to play with than everything come out of whack, because we assume that everyone will know the tool, there'll be no technical difficulties, and that apart from those things, that the team will just solve those things right away. So I think you got to build in ample time for the inevitable bumps along the road.
Okay, so some tricks that you mentioned: the chief decision officer, building up buffer time, and as Laura said, removing a bit of pressure and asking for feedback during and after the workshop are good practices to attempt to do your first workshop. Any other thing that you want to build up here about tips, best practices, or shall we move forward? I think we can move. Okay, then let's check question 5. Question 5 has to do with more tricks specific to Miro that you have shared either with your colleagues or clients. Some of the audience emailed me today and they asked me, wait, if my clients don't have Miro, like what shall I do? So I'm opening here the mic for first Justin and then any of you ladies. What do you typically do in terms of features, tricks, and things to make sure that whoever is going to join your workshop is going to have a good experience?
So I'm going to say 2 things that are factual, and then I'm going to say a pretty hard opinion that I have that y'all may disagree with. And I may be fired from working with Miro for this. So number 1 is I use the edit function. I send out editor links to participants. They can jump in. I don't require them to have a day pass. I don't know which name they are. That's usually okay. Honestly, we can end up making the decision still. And when we can't, when there's still difficulties, I always frame the specific workspaces and frame individual people's workspaces where I prepared all their elements. The reason I do that is that when someone DMs in the Zoom chat or the Miro chat or whatever, they say, I can't get to where we are. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'm stressed out. I can just send them the direct link to that frame, and that just sends them right there. That way, I, as a facilitator, don't have to be like, no, zoom out. Can you share your screen? Do this, whatever. I just I DM them the link to that frame. But all of this comes to something that is becoming an increasing belief of mine, that I think that the people that I'm workshopping with, unless they use Miro on a day-to-day basis, don't need to be in a Miro board. And I am working really hard. And we've got some fun tricks up our sleeves at Crema to try and figure out how to do this for people that are using Miro, to use it as a collaborative space to view, as opposed to a collaborative space to edit. And the difference there is that if I'm a facilitator and I'm going to stand up in a room, you're going to hand me your sticky notes oftentimes, and I'm going to put it on the wall. Other times you may put stuff on the wall, and that's great. But everyone has the skill to take a sticky note and put it on the wall. Most people do, at least. But with Miro, like the zooming in, the zooming out, sometimes elements are locked. They zoom in, they can't double click. There's so much confusion. Is it a trackpad? Is it Windows? Is it Chrome, Firefox? I found it to be way easier to do everything possible to keep it as analog as possible. But I try and make a really well-designed Miro experience, and I share my screen. So if I'm facilitating something, unless it's like an internal Crema thing where we use it day after day and it's all an extension of our fingers and eyes, I'm not going to force people to get into the Miro board. It usually complicates it and makes people distracted by the process that we're trying to go through and the tool we're trying to use, as opposed to the problem they're trying to solve in the first place.
Okay, so you're saying, and I want to hear the others' opinion, that sometimes it's better to have them have a good ability to follow and participate in the discussion, mostly verbally, than actually collaborate and add their own content.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to counter that point, probably because of where I work. So working in a large company, I have been more insistent that people get in there. And the primary reason is that I want to build a culture where people are doing more collaborative meetings, and there's not, this is a meeting yesterday where there was one person who was just droning on, like they had really good information to share, but like we weren't doing anything with it. So I was trying to convince everybody like, hey, like that's really important information. And I have this catchphrase from a leader at PayPal for some time. She would say, write it down. Like she was just insistent. Every 2 seconds, write it down, write it down, write it down. And so I try to get people to write it down so that I'm not the recorder, only because in my company, I want everybody to begin sharing that. I don't want it to fall just to a couple of people. That's why I would do it differently. Although the way that I try to get people into it is I usually have the warm-up exercise do 2 things. I want them to be able to type in a sticky note, and I want them to be able to move a sticky note. And so in some of the examples that you can see to the right of the, if you can't log into the Miro board right now, that's okay, but later you can look at it. There's an example that just has like a warm-up exercise with a bunch of rooms in it. It says warm-up exercise, it's on gray, yeah. And so they have to type their name, and then they move their name into where they are in the house, because we're all working from home right now. So it gives people this collective sense of being in the same virtual space together, but it makes them do those 2 things. Type your name inside of a sticky, move the sticky. Those are the most important skill sets I need them to have, basically, is type and move.
Yeah, to add on that, I think it really depends on the type of session you're working. If you have a 1-hour session, I wouldn't use Miro as well. It doesn't make sense. But if you have a longer session, you can use actually Miro for people to bond and to get to know each other. So it doesn't have to be a separate exercise where people are frustrated how to use a Post-it, but it can be a bonding experience between people that they're enjoying. So it really depends. What's your goal? What is the content? What are the time limitations? What is also the background of the people that are participating? But definitely, we should not force it just because we like it. And just because it has potential, it doesn't mean it's not. Obviously, you can use a nail instead of a hammer, but you're not going to do a lot of work with it. And just to add 2 tips and tricks, because we started with this question. Instead of teaching people how to pan around the Miro board, we use frames. So we use frames for navigation, and that has been really helpful. We just say, go to frame number 6, go to frame number 10. And people really, it's like in a PowerPoint presentation, is something people are familiar with. And that's really easy. And the second tip, during breaks, we put the timer break in Miro so everybody can see it. So that's a really practical way. You don't have to write it in chat. You don't have to time it yourself. It's just there and it gives an audio signal.
Yeah, by the way, for those who are here, we are rolling out a new timer. It's about a bit more sleek, and actually the designer is around here, so you can share any feedback.
I want to say about the timer, this is like the only UX element I've ever met that I like the bounce.
You like the bounce of this one?
I do like it because it's got the chime and the bounce. So if people have their volume down, they see it bouncing like that. I know that some people might be like, well, that's kind of annoying, but it's like the best thing because it makes them engage with it. It's literally the only usage I've ever seen of a bounce that I think is working the right way.
Well, before it was bouncing indefinitely, and now you will see it's just a few times. One time.
I want to jump really quickly on what Anna said. That I think it's a really astute point you said. Just because that we like it doesn't mean that it'll work for others. I think that's a really, like, as anyone in design knows, that we have to start with empathy. And so I think that a tip and trick related to facilitating in Miro, I say you can't start with Miro, you must start with your client or your team, whoever it is that's in this workshop. Ask them, how familiar are they with tools like this? What tools are they familiar with? How do they prefer to participate in a workshop? There's been times where we have used Miro and we have maximized the hell out of Miro. It's been extraordinary. And yet our participants felt minimized because they weren't able to participate fully. Other times we hit the nail right on the head. The balance was perfect. We maximized Miro just enough that it really maximized the type of work they could do. But it has to start with empathy of understanding what the context is. And there's no hard and fast rule, but yeah, Anna, really, I agree.
So I'm being mindful of time. We had 2 more questions, but unless you really want to talk about engagement and fun, I'd like to also give the audience the opportunity to ask you questions. So you want to mention anything here very quickly, or shall we jump to the audience?
I just got one sentence to say.
Yeah, let's give them a voice.
Yes, okay. So I'm going to try bring I've never done this, so excuse me if this does not fully work, but I'm going to, yes, I think this should work. So this is the time for the questions that you most voted. So these questions are coming from Adrian. Open questions. Okay, yeah, 13 votes. So for any of you, Adrian asks, is there a way to easily check if all of my board objects are locked? Anybody?
You click on them and it will show you they're locked.
Right, on an individual or a group, but I think
any object, like if you have a group locked, if you click on it, it will show that it's locked.
Yeah, so exactly, she's probably asking, I want to lock all of them, and I don't think there is a function yet to see that all of them are locked. But yeah, you could check one by one or groups by groups. Okay, let's try to move to the next one. The next one is from Luis. In the panel's opinion, what is the learning curve like for attendees using Miro for the first time? Yes, interesting question. What would you say?
I'm finding it depends on the people that I'm working with, of course. I think that when I work with people who are in some kind of product design or definition, designers, writers, researchers, even product managers, this is like a familiar enough tool set for them. When I'm working with folks and they're part of my organization, maybe they're, again, like the risk team or the legal team, or, you know, we have a pretty large compliance group here. It's a lot steeper of a climb. And so to Justin's point, yeah, do I need to use Miro in those cases is a good question to ask. But generally speaking, the learning curve can vary. But if you have people in your audience who have some experience with PowerPoint or experience with, like designing PowerPoints or designing with, you know, Figma or Sketch or any kind of like vector-based tools, they'll get it pretty quickly.
Anything to add, like any tricks? You mentioned before that you use some way of welcoming them. Is it possible that you add some of your ways to introduce new people to Miro? I love the example of the room that Laura added, but even anybody from the audience, if you have some good resources to onboard new people to Miro, that will be interesting to add here. Okay.
I just want to clarify that when I see somebody in the chat is asking, what does quickly mean versus steep curve? By quickly, I mean someone who is getting on the board and they are contributing kind of in the way that they want to within about 5 to 10 minutes. Steep curve is someone who during the hour meeting, it's maybe only in the last 15 minutes where they feel like they're able to contribute. So that's the difference that I mean in terms of how much time that takes, just to clarify.
I would say, Laura, that I've had steeper curves that it's only on like day 3 of a workshop that someone's really able to navigate. Like especially if I'm working with someone that's not tech savvy, they're on an old machine, they're trying to run Zoom and Miro at the same time. Like I've seen some really steep curves there.
Yeah, it totally depends on your audience. I'm fortunate in the sense that everybody I'm working with has been issued a computer by, you know, the company, and we're all using that kind of standard tool set already. But yeah, results are going to be varied incredibly depending on who you're working with. Thanks.
Wonderful. So moving to next question, Nick asked, do you keep control of the Miro board or do you give participants control? That very meta question. It can be functional and meta. So I'd like to hear how you approach this.
Well, I'll agree with Justin. I usually give editor rights to all participants. So they can move stuff around, they can type. They don't have full rights, so they can't do everything. But yeah, they're able to edit and move stuff around. That's why locking is essential.
I have seen a very interesting usage sometimes to call the attention of participants, especially when working in breakout rooms. You remove the edit access, even the comment access, and giving them viewing access, so everybody comes back to the center, to the main room, where the facilitator will walk through next steps. Okay, let's talk to this question. Sarah asked, today board looked cool because it wasn't totally linear. What is the best place to get inspiration for board design? So Christian already shared a really good resource. Like Miro is investing a lot on Miroverse, which is user-generated templates. Any other thoughts from the panel?
I mean, so having done a lot of product discovery, like back in the day when we were all in the office, I made a lot of paper templates because I would hand those out to my participants to fill out. And I find myself going back to those and seeing if I can repurpose them a little bit differently. So I tend to look at research templates. I saw Justin had used one of those common templates that we use to understand business value propositions. Sorry, I'm like blanking on what the name is, but go and look for the template that kind of matches what you're trying to do. And if it doesn't exist in the Miroverse, it might be time to recreate that.
Okay, so yeah, we'll note that. I'm also checking next question that Jair, one of my colleagues, shared. There is a website called Miro Onboarding in Miroverse, where you can have also good onboarding templates to solve that question of new people who start using Miro. So I think Laura shared a concept that I like. It's about not giving people the fish, but the ability to fish. So you want to empower them, even if that means using a portion of the intro of the workshop to teach them, but it's always your own decision. So I also feel like why Justin and Anna sometimes feel the other way around. So let's see, next question. As a non-designer, I see all of these cool Miro boards. Any tips? So, okay, let's try to frame this question not as a templates and Miroverse and these things, like what are some of your tips if you are designing a board to make it look cool, as Liz mentioned?
I mean, I think, you know, the great thing about Miro, it's pretty easy to change your font. It's easy to, you guys have a good set of you know, colors to choose from that are in the default color palette. So I would just kind of go in and play around with some of the colors and fonts and see if it, you know, if you don't have a brand style guide that you need to follow, which sounds like fun to me, play around with those because they're right there in the tools, and you don't have to. I don't know if you're familiar with Canva, but it's kind of like that. You can kind of go in and just start making elements, and then Miro does enough to help you make it look good without having to try too hard.
Great. Before we answer one or two more questions, I'd like to ask you all to leave your feedback, especially those who are in the board, but I'm going to share also this link so you know where to do it. It's mostly because this is the first time that we are doing this type of session, and I'd like to hear what went well, what could be better, and any suggestions, like what should we organize next? Is this format the right one? Any other format, any other topics? Well, while you do that, and I will gladly welcome real and honest feedback. One other topic, I think we've talked briefly about it, but maybe you have something else to add. How can you ease the participant experience? Any thoughts before or during the workshop?
You mean working with Miro in general?
I think Elaine here is talking about the participant experience. Like, how can you make sure that it is at least, no, I don't say delightful right away, but at least easy to follow, easy to contribute, that they feel somehow included and active members of the workshop?
I would say usually people like to contribute when they feel seen. And there are a number of ways how you can do that so that people feel that their opinion is important, and it's also fairly okay. Let's say that technically they're able to contribute. Okay, let's say that this part is done. I think when you create a safe space where everybody's genuinely welcomed, I think that can create a very welcoming experience, and just being mindful of the needs of participants, taking it step by step, being clear, and just making sure that there are different preferences in the room and different people need different things. As a facilitator, you have your own preferences and your own biases, but you should be aware that some people might be engaged even if they're silent.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean if they don't talk that they're disengaged. So yeah.
Wonderful. Well, a lot of thoughts. We're going to share this recording via email. We also leave you here with some resources. On the left are Miro related resources, so you want to dig deeper into some of the templates and all. On the right side, some facilitation resources. We also welcome that you add your own here, because that can help us as a community learn about this important skill of facilitation. I want to thank you all for attending, and especially these three great facilitators that have put together different thoughts and different skills for us to keep improving. So looking forward to welcoming you again, and thank you, the three of you and each of the members of the audience, for coming today.